How y'all doing? As Paul said, my name's Dave Scanlon. I've been growing in Central Florida for about 17 years now, and one thing that I kind of got obsessed with years ago was growing onions because I realized you can grow a whole year's worth in one growing season, and kind of expanded from there. I'm from over there. We used to live over there, and I'm from 1,000 miles that way. Basically what I'm going to talk about today is alliums. Alliums are just the catch-all term for any lily species that we use as vegetables. So onions, garlic, shallots, leeks, perennial onions, things of that nature. Most of this is going to be focused on organic production because most of these are vegetables that we've been dealing with and growing as humans for thousands of years. So they need a human hand in order to grow well. At the end of it, we'll talk about some perennial ones. So if you're like diehard food forest, I'm going to plant things one time. We'll talk about some varieties that do good in that situation as well. So I guess we'll just kind of get into it. What we'll kind of do is break it down is we'll do onions, garlic, and then some of the other stuff at the end. And we'll talk about kind of like what their kind of deal is basically, and then go through a season of work for it. So right as of this point, we're basically mid-season now. Most of these things that we're taking advantage of our cool weather during the fall into spring season. So most of these things are fairly timing sensitive to get good results out of. So you're planting in the fall or the very, very, very late summer, and then you're harvesting in that like April, May, usually for most things. So we'll kind of just kick off from here. I'm using the slideshow. This is to keep me on target as much as it is just information for everybody else too, because I'll go on a tangent about something and then we're talking about something else. So alliums in Central Florida, growing annual perennial onions, garlic, more for your family, friends, and community. So every culture in the world grows these plants. There's one species of vegetable that humans, not different cultures, humans grow than onions and garlic and everything like that, and that's tomatoes. That's the only thing that we grow more of as a species than any other thing. So, and again, like we were talking about, Central Florida is a long fall to spring season that is excellent for producing most alliums. Not one's perfectly adapted here, can easily be cultivated with the addition of some modern technology. Mostly a refrigerator. And then due to the secondary chemistry of this genus, which gives their distinctive flavors, which is what we like about them, is even though everybody says they're stinky and stuff like that, that's why we eat them, because they taste good. They make other food taste good too. They have health benefits as well. Pests are minimal to non-existent in our climate, and one of the few genera of companion plants that has actually been studied in direct benefit to other common garden vegetables we grow over the cool months. So we're growing brassicas right now. We're growing a lot of greens and stuff like that now. Alliums work well I'm not a big companion planting person because some of it is a little questionable if it actually works, but alliums, because of their secondary chemistry, are excellent to grow with them. So this is something that when we're planting broccoli, or we're planting cabbage, we're planting kale, things like that, we're planting onions with them because it helps reduce some pests that they have. And the beautiful thing about onions is we have almost no pests with them here. So most are easily going to grow for beginner gardeners and beyond. There's rarely complete failure with these plants, which is I think something that's kind of nice compared to, like, let's say tomatoes. They get every pest in the world. They have a ton of issues. The worst thing about an allium crop that goes bad is you get less. You don't get none. So it's a good thing for new gardeners a lot of times too, where you can get some, kind of some experience growing, so a little bit needier plants without having like total failure, which I like a lot too. So, and then also if your goal is to grow a year's worth, which I think a lot of times we get obsessed with as gardeners, once you get to the size where you're like, okay, I can grow this, I can grow 10 of them, but it's not a whole lot harder to grow 500 of them. And then what's nice about that is because we can store them long-term with some different techniques, you can grow a year's worth. So even though this is a seasonal vegetable, we're growing all our onions once a year, and we ran out of onions this year from last year, like what, a month ago? So that was a year's worth of one thing, which is kind of nice. We're not going to ever always be able to grow all of our own food at every single time, but we can grow all of certain things, which is pretty easy to do with most alliums. So these are all the annual ones like I was talking about. We're going to go to these first because these are one of the most common ones that most people are going to want to grow, and then also the ones that most people are going to want to. So we got short day onions, garlic, some multiplying green onions, shallots, and leeks. Best suited to intensive annual production via row cropping, raised beds, etc. Irrigation and soil fertility matter to most of these species. And as I was saying earlier, these have been in the human hands the longest. These are not wild plants, these are cultivated plants. Allium cepa, which is the onion species, doesn't exist in the wild. We have created that because it tastes good. And we've been growing it for thousands of years too. So they're propagated by seed or seed bulbs / cloves, which is how garlic is generally produced, and we have a fall to spring production on them. Oops, I went to short day bulb onions. So there's different types of onions, and when you go to you open a seed catalog this time of the year, you're getting 1 million of them probably. If you've signed up for one seed catalog, you end up getting 20 seed catalogs. So you're gonna see in a lot of different ones that aren't Florida or the South specific, you're gonna see long day, intermediate day, and short day onions. And how that works for onions is there's a vegetative stage and then a bulbing stage with onions, and long day and short day onions have different requirements for day length in order for that to happen. And like when I was talking about earlier with it's a time-sensitive thing, that's what I'm talking about. Because what we're getting to is we're growing plants until the day lengths are correct for them to form that bulb at the end of the season, and that's what we get. The rest of the time, if we grow long day onions down here, we get real nice shallots, or real nice scallions. We get green onions, but we don't get bulb onions from long day onions here because asking a long day variety to grow into the summer long enough to have days that are long enough for them to store a bulb, basically, it's near impossible because we've got heat, we've got humidity, we've got a whole bunch of other things. If you're in Minnesota, grow long day onions. And if you're in Florida, you're going to grow short day onions. So short day onions, onions more than likely originated in Central Asia. They're grown in Southern Europe for a long time, and the onions that we grow in the South generally came via Spain, via Bermuda, via Texas to the rest of the South. So Bermuda this is a cool fact more than anything. So the east coast of the US used to get all their onions from Bermuda back in the day in like the late 1800s because they were far enough south to grow short day onions in the middle of the winter, just like we do here. But it's like a semi-tropical climate. So they called the Bermuda the onion patch back in the day because we would ship them to East Coast cities and stuff like that. Seed from those original Bermuda onions came to Texas via a couple growers, and they developed pretty much all of the common bulb onions in South Texas for growing in short season over the winter. So you see a lot of the names of these things have Grano or Texas or something like that in the name. That's why they're called that. So they're mostly sweet yellow type onions. There's some white and red. Again, most of these onions are not storage onions. They're sweet onions. Vidalia, strawberry onions, they're all in this same thing. We'll talk about that later, what that actually is. And they require, like I was talking about, around 10 hours of day length to initiate bulb formation. So we're getting, probably in March, we'll start seeing bulb formation of what we planted in October. They have a very short storage length due to their high sugar and water content and low sulfur content. So that means we can grow a lot of them. We have to grow them all once, basically, because of the day length. And then we have to figure out how to store them longer term if we want to grow a whole year's worth all at once. So the beginning of the season for them, you can start from seed or you can start from starts. So this time of the year, if you go to big boxes, you're going to see what are called sets. They're basically useless here. They are a little tiny onion. What that is a long day variety that has been grown for, onions are biennial. They don't flower the first year except for some random occasions. So what they do is they grow these set onions. They're basically a year old, you plant them, and then if you're in Virginia North basically, you can grow them as that. But here you're either growing them from seed or you're growing them from starts. And all that is you're purchasing from a company that's starting them from seed, growing them out to like a pencil-sized onion start, and then you're planting them from there. So that's kind of it's a long-term process, so some people will just get them from starts rather than seed. Needs some babying to get up into transplant size and time. Again, this is time sensitive, so you're starting at the right time to get them for planting ready in about November, usually October to December, I guess, if you really want to give it like a wide span. Personal favorites for mine are 1015 Texas Super Sweet, which is, like we were talking about, a lot of these are from Texas originally. Texas Early White, Yellow, Grano, Grain X, and Creole Red. There's some hybrids, which are newer varieties that most of them are more for disease resistance for diseases we don't have in Florida a whole lot, so they're not as helpful. They tend to be a little more consistent on the production side, but I've grown open pollinated, which are heirloom, and then also some hybrids over time, and I don't think I have a preference either way with them at this point. I prefer round varieties, which is kind of a nitpicky kind of thing, but it makes sense if you think about it. So a lot of the big Vidalia onions are what are called like a grano style, which means they're kind of flattened. But if you're not a great gardener, what'll happen when those fill out to bulb size is that bottom ends up a little inverted. And when you go to cut slices out of them, there's like the root is inside a little bit, and it drives me nuts. So I'm like, I'd rather just have round ones at this point. So it's, again, like we can grow all this stuff, but when you get to the kitchen with it and you're frustrated by it, are you gonna really pick that variety next year? So ordering starts, not sets, we talked about that before. From companies offering them. I get some in from Texas. I grow some myself as well, and I'll probably be offering them in the fall. I usually do them on pre-order so I can get all my supplies ready for the season after that. Difficult to succession plant due to day length requirements. So as we're talking about earlier, we're trying to get onions to max size when the day length is the right for them to form bulbs. So a lot of times you think like with lettuce, you're like, I'm gonna plant lettuce every 2 weeks and just have lettuce forever. It's hard to do with onions because you're trying to get them at the right day length in order to get a full-size onion. Planting, so again, these are human-created plants. These aren't permaculture food forest plants, so you do need a little bit more of a little heavier hand within that than what you're gonna grow with more perennial type things. So pre-plant with a balanced organic fertilizer, a Spoma garden tone you can get at any big box, it's easy to find, and then a little bit of high nitrogen to get them up and growing, because as we're going to talk about in a minute, how that process goes kind of matters with that in the beginning. So NatureSafe 1200 blood meal for nitrogen in the beginning, mineralization amendments like azomite or rock dust are helpful. I usually do that every couple years or so with my garden just to remineralize my soil. I grow in the soil here. I have some raised beds for some things. I don't grow alliums in raised beds for the most part. It's in the sand that has been improved over time. Compost and or worm castings are helpful just to hold needed moisture in onion beds and gardens. Irrigation, they don't have long roots. These are not a broccoli or a tomato that's gonna have a 3-foot root. They have a root ball that's only about a foot deep for the most part at the most. So in this time of the year and this winter where it was nice and rainy the whole time, not as much of an issue, but like last year where it was like bone dry as soon as February came around, then you need to irrigate basically. Plant starts 5-6 inches apart. That's not an exact thing. I'm a big fan of figuring out the length of things that are on you when you're outside already. So this is onion spacing right there. That's how far. It's like 5.5 inches or something like that. And that's pretty much good. So then I can go down the row and plant. So I plant on drip tape, so I row garden, very typical kind of old school garden style, I guess, and then offset planting when you do that. So you're not planting 6 inches and then 6 inches and then go down the row. You're planting 6 inches this way, so you're maximizing your space and all your resources too. Mid-season, depending on soil conditions, you can band extra fertilizer in. I generally do. Some years I forget. I still get onions. I just get less onion. Fertigate with liquid fertilizer every other week. This is not allium specific. If you're growing a lot of stuff over the winter, your soil biology slows down. This is all organic production. I don't do chemical fertilizers or anything like that. If you are using chemical fertilizers, have at it 20-20-20 until they're this big. You can do that if you want. But for what I'm trying to do and work on a long-term soil building in our home gardens, I'm trying to improve soil long-term. So that means do things all organic for the most part or better. Small light doses of nitrogen in the winter keeps your soil biology moving. All these organic granular fertilizers that you use, if you take that and you take brand new garden soil, especially here where it's sandy and a little bit hydrophobic, if you put organic fertilizer into that, plants don't access that until the bacteria and soil life that you have breaks it down for that to be available to them. So what you end up with is basically fertilizer sitting next to plants that can't utilize it and hoping that there's enough stuff in your soil to break it down. So compost, worm castings, organic liquid fertilizers help break all that stuff down and keep your soil life moving, especially in the cooler months where that's a slower process to begin with. So just that's applicable to any annual vegetable production. And 1 leaf, 1 layer of onion. That's something to kind of note once you get into mid-season. So We're pushing them hard in the beginning with a little bit of extra fertilizer, but once they start bulbing, they don't need that. So what we're trying to do to get that from less onion to more onion, you're maximizing two things: the amount of space between the layers and the amount of layers that you have. Every layer in an onion is a leaf. So when you put in a little onion start with 2 leaves on it, it's only got 2 layers in there. If you went in there and took an X-Acto knife and cut that, there's only 2 layers. But you get to a full-size onion and you cut it, you can count the rings just like a tree almost, because it's a monocot. It's only growing 1 leaf at a time. It's just growing 1 leaf, and each leaf is under the ground, is attached to that initial basically stem that it comes out of. So more leaves in the right amount of time. When you get to that time of the year, when they start forming bulbs, mean you have more layers. You've got good fertilizer, good water, things like that. Onions are like 85% water, so it's a lot of water in there. So that means thicker layers. So you get more layers, thicker layers, you get an onion like this. You get less leaves, less layers, you get an onion like that instead. Again, it's not a total failure ever. It's always just less. Again, failure is getting baseballs, not softballs. So end of seasons or harvest, that's going to start coming up. We're basically mid-season now, so you're probably looking at like April to May a lot of the times. So around 10-hour day length bulbs will form. Again, we're talking about short day onions. We're talking about stuff from here. I've only grown stuff like this in Florida, so I can't speak to other regions on that. Around 10-hour day lengths will begin to form, can be harvested and utilized whole, which is kind of nice. That's why I don't grow a lot of leeks, because when you get to full size, they get a leek growing at the top of them because they're not going dormant yet. The stalks leaves are great grilled or used like leeks. I do like them like that. And a lot of times this time of the year, you'll start seeing, especially if you go down to a Plant City area, what they call strawberry onions. All of a strawberry onion is a regular short day onion that has gotten the same fertilizer schedule as strawberry plants, which means they are monstrous. And they're super sweet because of that too. So you'll see them with the green tops on them and everything like that. They advertise them as strawberry onions. It's just a short day onion that's not at the storage phase yet. And they're delicious like that too. So that's a real treat for that couple weeks when you have them in your own garden. Handful of onions may not bulb out fully. Like I said, around 5–10% with open pollinated varieties. Seems like you get some that are just not wanting to bulb up for whatever reason. Just use them as spring or green onions. Again, there's no failure, there's just less onion. When the tops fall over at the neck, which is what happens, so again, these are biannual plants. So you're growing them out for the first year, essentially. We're not growing them out to the flowering stage, because we're eating them basically halfway, even as a full-size onion. Because they're biennials, they have a stage of senescence where the tops will die down. Basically, they kind of seal themselves in because it's a storage organ, essentially. And in theory, you can take them and plant them back out the year after in the fall, and they will flower that year, and you can save seed off of varieties like that too. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. So when the tops fall over at the neck, which basically, so if your onion plant coming up, they're going to get to that point where they're going to form a bulb at the right day length, and a few weeks after that, to about a month afterwards, the tops will start falling over, and that's where basically all the energy that was in those leaves is getting stored in your bulb, and that's when you can store them long term, because basically they're sealing themselves off. So when the top falls over, it can be pulled in what's called field curing, which is basically you just go out there once. If I'm row gardening, so I got a 40-foot row and I've got 35 of those feet where the necks have all fallen over, you're literally pulling them up and dropping them to the ground. So you're just getting them to dry out more. You're drying out the bottom end of it, basically where the roots are. So after they're field cured, move to ideally wire racks or similar in shade. We have a carport, and it's like perfect for that because it's in the shade, but it has good airflow. And we just set up some wire racks. So basically, we're just laying them out in a single layer. And all you're trying to do is get that neck where the plant was, where the exchange of nutrients were coming from the leaves is sealed off, and the roots are sealed off, and then it's in that kind of storage phase where it's not going to grow. And that's what our onion is when we want to have it to eat, basically. So we cure on wire racks under our carport with a box fan just to keep the air moving. Once the roots and neck fully dried, both can be trimmed, and medium smalls can be braided, which is kind of nice too. So if you want something to look cool, a lot of those ones that didn't make perfect bulbs, which tend to store better too than the ones that have a whole ton of water in them. So you get those little baseball-sized ones, you can braid them up just like garlic. and store them like that, and you look like you know what you're doing when you do that. So it can be stored at room temperature, cool, dry, on wire rack, single layer. Like we were talking about, if you have old orange bags, you can hang them in them. They work pretty good for that if you got like a walk-in pantry or something like that. Good airflow and dry is important. Storage lengths for these sweet onions. Under 4 months, very sweet onions, like you get those big, amazing ones, they're hanging out for 2 months at best. So again, we're talking about growing a year's worth of food with something that only stores for two months. There's some things that we got to do past that. So after the storage time is up, freezing is the most viable option. That's usually what I'll do. So we have wire racks in our kitchen that this stuff gets stored on, and once we get a couple that get soft or a little funky, we go full mode of basically caramelizing them all down and freezing them. So after the storage time is up, freezing is the most viable option. Larger ones tend to go bad faster. Chopped frozen on cookie trays and vac packs the easiest, but it takes up a lot of space, especially if you're trying to grow a year's worth. You're trying to put away 400 onions or so. For us, is usually what it ends up being. Our preferred long storage method, we caramelize them down by type. So just all the reds together, all the whites together, all the yellows, because they have kind of different flavors. So what we do is we'll take 10, 15 pounds of onions and caramelize them down until they all fit in a single pan. Because again, 90%, yeah, here I put it actually in here. I put onions are almost 90% water, store the flavor, not the water. So basically you're just cooking them down, and then how many meals do you cook where you start caramelize an onion? And that takes forever. If you do it all in one day and you have them all frozen, you just break a piece off, throw it in the pan. You just shave 25 minutes off of dinner just in one motion. And then the biggest, best open pollinated onions can be replanted in the fall for seed production. So if you're dead set on growing your own seed, because they're biennial plants, you'll get to probably like August or September, you'll start seeing green tops shoot out of some of the ones that are in storage. In theory, I've done it. The problem with onion seed is it's very short-lived. It only lives for about 2 years. So if you're trying to grow a whole lot of seed from your own onions, onion seed is cheap. Sometimes I just go, no, I'll just buy seed. So you can plant them out. They will go to seed, usually like December, I feel like it is when I've done it before. And you can save seed off of them. They make a small flower head. Remember, they're lilies, so it actually has a pretty little flower poof ball, at the top, and you can save seed off of that if you want to as well. This is the big one that everybody wants to grow, but it's tough to grow here. So garlic. I just thought that quote was great. Without garlic, I simply would not care to live. Louis Diot was a food writer from the 20s. He's a French guy. He lived in New York for a while. I thought it was kind of funny. It's not perfectly adapted to Florida growing conditions, but it can be grown easily if one requirement is addressed. They're grown from seed garlic. So seed garlic is extra large clove or heads of garlic that are then broken up, and then you're planting individual cloves to grow for next year. So you're not growing them from seed. And there's 3 general types. There's subdivisions of them, but there's softneck, hardneck, and elephant. Softneck is the one that has the most human hands on, as I say. So those are the ones that don't make seed themselves anymore. Hardnecks are almost like a wild, quasi-wild garlic, which do set seeds if you want scapes and things like that. That's the variety that does that. And then elephant garlic is not actually a garlic, it's a leek. I grow a little bit of it, not as much as regular garlic. Pre-season and planting. So garlic, unfortunately, is a planting crop. You got to kind of get it all ahead. And what's frustrating about garlic sometimes, too, is it doesn't bulb till right before storage. So you're literally taking possibly 10 months of time to grow garlic throughout this entire process for those last few weeks to actually be the thing that matters. So choose softneck varieties that have been proven to be tolerant of seasonal fluctuations. That's the big thing. So this year was nice and cool. Great garlic season so far. I've got garlic plants in my garden right now that are incredible looking, and they're all different varieties that I haven't even grown before too. It's tolerant of seasonal fluctuations. So our go-to variety for consistency has been the Enchilium red. It's from Washington originally. And then a few other ones that I've grown the most successfully over time is Thai fire, Shandong, Xi'an, which are Thai garlic, and then 2 South Chinese garlics. They're from regions with warmer climates, so they tend to handle. Again, this winter was nice and cool. It was pretty tempered. It was a pretty good growing season, minus a ton of rain and some cloudy days. But like last year, it was schizophrenic weather. It was 25 degrees, it was 85 degrees, and then 25 degrees again, then 85 degrees again. we grew 10 varieties of garlic, and Chilean red blew the other ones away as far as production by the end of it because they were tolerant of those fluctuations like that. Again, we're trying to grow a northern crop in a southern state. So hardnecks like cooler weather in general, there's a few that do okay here that I've had decent success with, but I do think softnecks in general are gonna be the way to go. Hot winter can make for reduced harvest like we were just talking about. All garlic needs chill before planting. So if there's anybody that's grown garlic in northern states, you plant it in the fall and it sits in the ground all winter, and then it comes out of dormancy in the spring, and you get garlic in the middle of summer. We're missing a critical season here to make that happen, which is winter. So how we do that is we all have refrigerators nowadays, which is a real nice place to fake some winter. So it's called vernalization, which just means cold storage. I use the actual term because we don't have to call it cold storage. There's an actual word for it. So regardless of type, except for elephant, because that's a leek, you can just plant that as is. I offer pre-vernalized garlic, so what I do is I have a farm on the West Coast in Washington that I get seed garlic from, throw it in the fridge for 12 weeks, and then ship it at the right time of year. So the general gist seems to be 10 to 12 weeks of cold storage is what they need to not grow. They will grow. You can take a clove from the grocery store and put it in the ground, and it will grow. It will grow one big head. It will not grow cloves. Clove initiation is what happens when it's chilled for long enough. That initiates that split at the bottom where you end up with individual cloves instead of just one big, basically like almost looks more like an onion if you grow it just like that. So that clove initiation is what you need to fake. You fake the conditions for that to happen, which is that 10 to 12 weeks in the fridge, basically. So the West Coast garlic season ends in August. I get it shipped here, and then it's usually like end of November is when I usually plant and ship out for that. So it's a long process to get it going, but we're trying to literally fake an entire season to get garlic to grow here. I put at the bottom here because every once in a while when I talk about garlic, somebody will say, well, I planted store garlic and it did fine. And it probably does because that garlic has been sitting in cold storage for so long in a warehouse somewhere that it is vernalized. So every once in a while you plant it, but it's different varieties. And again, we're talking about varieties that do well with temperature fluctuations. Who knows what that variety is because you're not buying varietal garlic at the grocery store. You're just buying garlic. So. Growing, same general rules in onions. They don't need as much fertilizer though. So they like rich soil. They don't need like that high nitrogen in the beginning because again, we're growing this much, not this much. So wider spacing, 6 to 8 inches. So that's this. And then aim for 4 inches deep. So unlike garlic unlike regular bulb onions where you're just planting them right at the surface, garlic bulb's kind of deep. And again, we're in a subtropical climate. So that soil depth can actually get you a couple more weeks of good growing season where the soil temperature is cooler, you get more growth, you get bigger garlic. Cooler season equals longer season equals bigger garlic heads, consistent irrigation, mulch, hedges against a hot, dry summer, or spring, because you're not going to the summer with them. So again, now it doesn't matter because we're just in a vegetative state of growing, but when we get to the end of the season, we're like every once in a while, that May is just the desert basically, and super hot and windy and stripping moisture out of the soil. We're hedging against that by planting them a little bit deeper and occasionally with mulch. I tend to not mulch any vegetables. I know that bothers some people that you don't do that, but I don't because it just works with how I garden. It doesn't make sense to do. But planting them deeper actually helps. You can get those little dibblers. It's like a little spike. You can put them in the ground, get them deep in there. Or what I did was actually just took a tea stake and just put it in the ground, wiggle, drop a clove, move that far over, do another one down the row. Harvest and storage. So this is something that sometimes people have an issue with because unlike onions, you're not waiting for that full senescence basically of the entire plant because what we're trying to do is get a bulb that closes up together. So 30% leaves die back, and that's usually like May. That Thai Fire variety that I had recommended usually is about 3 weeks earlier than the other ones, which is kind of nice if you're growing a lot to like get a little bit harvested before you have to do all the rest. So 30% leaves die back. So again, you're going to end up with 8 to 12 leaves usually above ground, something like that. When you get to that point where about 30% of them have died back, that's when you harvest, because what you're trying to do is get that neck to seal up and keep the whole head in one big piece. If you get over, and just after a few years of growing garlic, I realized this too, over 40% dry leaves at harvest, they'll have what they call broken heads, which is basically where all the cloves start separating out, because again, the garlic's not growing for you to have delicious garlic, it's growing to reproduce itself. So it'll start breaking up in the ground, which means over time, it'll just make more and more garlic plants in a natural state, which we're not trying to accomplish. If you end up with broken heads, just use them first. That's all. They break up a little bit, they just don't store as well. Soft necks can be braided. Hard necks don't, because they have that flower stalk through the middle, but the soft necks, once you get them in storage and you cure them just like you do regular onions, you can braid them once they get a little bit soft. And we grew, was it 12 foot? 12-foot braided garlic last year. That was good for social media, just put it that way. The biggest, best clean heads can be saved for seed for the next season. So I've grown multi-generational garlic here at this point versus brand new seed garlic. I don't find a whole ton of difference. The biggest and best is what you're saving for next year, though. And you don't have to you're not waiting till the West Coast harvests their garlic to throw it in the fridge because you have it all yourself. So usually you can get to like end of August, September, all your biggest, best garlic heads, throw them in the crisper drawer and plant them out next year, or plant them out at November, December. Garlic stored in the fall may begin to sprout. That's just naturally how they do. When they get to that storage point, again, just like onions, we roast them and then freeze them. And having a big giant sheet of roasted garlic that you can just cut a little piece off and throw in a pan is a real dinner saver in the middle of the week. So kind of like that. Leeks, I'm going to talk about this one real quick. I don't grow a lot of leeks. Why? Because I grow a whole lot of onions and garlic. And you can use the top of regular bulb onions, kind of like leeks. The nice thing about leeks is, though, in general, there's a ton of different types of leeks, too, when you kind of dig into them a little bit. They're not dependent on day length because you're not growing a bulb. You're growing a stalk. So if you want to succession plant some type of allium throughout the cooler months, that's probably the best variety to do that with. Culture is identical to bulb onions. They're just as needy as regular bulb onions. They just don't form that bulb at the end of the season. They need to be planted deep for the larger whites or usable parts. So when you start your seed and you get those nice little starts growing that are about that tall, you're trying to plant them pretty deep so that white section that you get in a grocery store leek, which is what most people are going to want to use anyway, is larger because it's underground. That's why it has no chlorophyll in it. That's why it's like that. They can be ground stored in some climates. I know some people in Florida that do that too, but it seems like it's not a perfect science. It's like one of those, we get a year with a whole bunch of hurricanes and they kind of rot in the ground. So I'd rather not bother with that. Lack of storage ability besides freezing and dehydrating. Again, I grow like this year we're growing 400, 500 onions, about the same of garlic, and 30 leeks. You know, it's not something I grow a whole lot of. Shallots, I get asked about this one a lot. They're uniquely poorly suited to growing here, but that's not stopping me. So all bulbing varieties are long days. So we're talking about they need that very, very long day right in the middle of summer in order for them to form bulbs. They're poorly adapted to all growing regions south of like basically Virginia and North Carolina due to the day length requirements. I've grown long day shallots here several years now. And if I plant 100 of them, I get like 5 good shallots. So don't rely on that. There's several, and there's some unique ones outside of that typical kind of shallot style, though. So again, see if there's two different binomial names on these because there's different styles of shallots. So the Cepa var aggregatum is the same species as bulb onions. They're just a cluster or a multiplying type. And then the Oceanii, which I think is the French shallot, which I'm growing a couple of these right now, and even without the bulbing issue, French shallots do pretty poorly here. The non-minimal bulbing ones, so there's a Taiwanese red and then Louisiana green. I have Taiwanese red. If anybody has Louisiana green shallots, I will buy them from you. They're shallots. So they are the right species, they are the right variety, but they're ones that have been grown traditionally in hotter and shorter day areas. So Taiwan's pretty similar climate to Florida for the most part, except for the mountains, and then the ones from Louisiana as well. So basically they're a multiplier onion. They don't make a big bulb. So you're using them basically like a shallot flavored green onion. They're kind of nice. The Taiwanese red's pretty awesome. And then I put a note down here at the end. I'm doing some lighting experiments to force bulbing earlier in the spring with regular shallots. If this works out, that would make my year. Basically what we're doing is we're trying some shorter season varieties and then lighting them in the spring when our days are around that 10 hours. We're going to light them up to 14 to 16 hours a day in order to see if we can force bulbing off season with them. The beautiful thing about technology nowadays is there's waterproof LED lighting that you can use, horticultural lighting. That did the dragon fruit thing a couple months ago. He showed some pictures of in Vietnam where they do this to get continuous dragon fruit production into the winter with the shorter days, because dragon fruit are daylight sensitive as well. And also UF right over here in Apopka is doing the same exact style of force season, basically, with hops to get northern hop varieties to grow in central Florida because they need long days in order to flower. And they basically have stadium lighting over those fields, and they're lighting them so they get 2 hop harvests a year now. So they have stadium lighting. I have 2 bulbs in my front yard. And we're going to do that with shallots and see if we can knock out some shallots with some low wattage LED lighting. So that's an experiment that I'm really hoping works out well. Perennial alliums. So these are the permaculture onions. These are the ones you can grow. You can either plant or you can continually save bulbs from forever. So these are the easiest to grow. These are the least needy. They're the closest to being wild onions too, and actually there's one on here that's a native onion too. So we got regular onion chives, which are just your standard issue, the little tiny hollow chives. They're kind of better over just the winter. They don't really function through our summer well, but there's 2 different flat-bladed chive type onions. Most people grow the garlic chives. There's another variety called hooker-eye chives, which are, garlic chives are from East Asia. Hooker-eye chives are from South Asia, so they're more popular in India. I sit and look at mine side by side every once in a while, and I can't tell them apart. But as soon as you break a leaf, you know which one's the garlic chives and which one's the hooker-eye chives, because the hooker-eye chives have a distinct onion flavor. Garlic chives are definitely more garlicky. Multiplier bunch onions, most of these are Cepa variegatum. So again, back to them being one species. That's the same species as bulb onions, shallots, and then the multiplier onions. We were talking about the multiplier onions earlier. The shallot style ones, there's other ones that are basically just like a scallion or a green onion type. Raku onions, which is basically a larger species, very similar to garlic, but they make a tiny bulb that you pickle. It's popular in Korea, China, and Japan. And then if you read any permaculture books from outside of our region, somebody will swear that the only onion you should grow is walking onions or tree onions or Egyptian onions. There's a couple varieties of them. They grow here. They grow very slow here because they really do like cooler weather. They like a dormancy period, things like that. When we first moved out to Clerimont, we had a neighbor across the street was a market gardener, and he was from New York originally, and he lined his driveway with big pots of Egyptian onions because he was like, these are going to go great. Everybody needs scallions, perfect. And I was like, how they grow? And he's like, I got some for myself. And that was it. So I grow a red variety. I've grown the regular variety too. They're slow. That's the only thing. Compared to, again, with other things, there's other better options here. We don't have to do just exactly what people from other climates tell us we have to do. So with the exception of summer dormant aggregatum bunching onions, which are the Florida Finley onions, I sell them, and Josh Jameson is the one that kind of got them out of the family that was growing them for a few decades down in Polk County. It's a very typical, very straight-bladed, perfect, picturesque scallion type onion, green onion. These can be planted in place permanently in theory, but I tend to pull them out at the end of the season. So they have a summer dormancy, so basically May to September, no Finley onions. They're easy enough to just pull out. Rich soils preferred, these are the food forest truly permaculture onions. Multiplier onions, grown from dormant bulbs or bulb divisions. So again, these are what you're planting a single dry bulb, which are turning into about 20 over the course of the season. And if you get good about it, you can break up those clusters in between seasons and stuff like that. I got 20 from Josh in 2021, and we now grow them several 40-foot rows of them a year from that initial 20 tiny little bulbs that I got. So it's very easy to end up with a year's supply of them in just a couple growing seasons. Talking about onion chives, they tend to burn out in the summer here, so I do like if you're gonna do more like a chive, small type onion like that, garlic and hooker eye chives are the best. Meadow garlic is kind of cool. That's a native species. That's native from Canada to here, to I think as further south than Texas too. Locally here, Green Isle Garden sells it. And that naturalizes real nice. And as I put in here, it's a native allium. Green Isle sells it. A bunch are top set divisions, so they make a little top set just like a Egyptian walking onion does. And then just be a native plant metis, grow it. It'll end up in your neighbor's lawn. It's real easy to grow. I have a couple little patches of it throughout the yard, and it does pretty good. Really strong. It's like a tiny little chive, but it has got chive flavor. It's a chive, but it tastes like chive. The raku, which I'm evaluating right now, I think it'll do pretty good here. And then the tree onions we talked about, it's like an XL green scallion onion. Not vigorous in our climate, but it grows just fine for most people's uses. And that was about it. So that was my garlic harvest from last year. And that's my kid holding a 3-pound red Creole onion that we grew a couple years ago. So again, if that isn't a picture of what you can do here with onions, I got nothing else for you. I sell, I'll just plug myself briefly, practicalplantsfl.com. I'm right over here in Clerimont. I sell Finley onions in season. We sell the garlic and hooker eye chives all year round. And then I do either grow myself or get in from Texas onion starts and garlic from the West Coast in the season. And what I do is I sell that all. I assume most people forget about stuff because I do. So what I do with that is I usually sell it on pre-order at the end of the summer. And when you go, hey, when was I supposed to plant garlic? They show up at your house. So that's the way that I work on it, because if I was ordering from someone, that's how I would want to deal with it. So that's about it. Yeah. We are dreamers of the